You've ridden in a car, haven't you? You've heard the engine running, you've seen the tires rolling. Have you ever wondered which wheels are being driven by the engine? If you haven't, what is wrong with... Okay. So today we'll discuss front wheel drive, rear wheel drive and all wheel drive cars and all the other aspects of driving a car this impacts in today's episode of The More You Know. Hi there, my name is Neil and welcome to my channel. Now, before we start, since not all of you my viewers are called Ferruccio or Ettore or Gordon, we need to know a couple of terms first. Starting with live and dead axles. Look, you know what an axle is, right? A long metal member running across the width of the car, housing wheels at both its ends. Simple enough, so every car with 4 wheels have 2 axles, front and rear. Live axle is just the one being powered by the engine and dead axle is the one which is not. Number 2, transverse and longitudinal engines. Every piston engine is powered by pistons oscillating inside cylinders, a number of them. These cylinders are usually arranged in a line or sometimes in a V, all driving a common crankshaft which converts the oscillating motion of the pistons into rotational motion which ultimately drives the car. In case of Wankel engines, there is a rotating triangular piece inside the engine which drives, once again, the crankshaft. If the engine is mounted in a way so that the crankshaft is parallel to the direction the car is traveling, it's a longitudinal engine. If it's perpendicular, it's transverse. As simple as that. Third point, weight transfer. Have you ever traveled in a bus while standing? Then you must have noticed that when a moving bus brakes, it throws you forward. And when it starts to accelerate again, you're thrown backwards. Guess who or what else is experiencing that weight transfer? The bus itself. In fact, every car experiences this weight transfer while braking and accelerating. So, BMW saying our cars are the best handling in the world because it has 50-50 weight distribution on its front and rear axles. And Ferrari saying no, we are wrong, 53% of the weight needs to be on the rear for the ideal handling. All these facts do nothing to tell you how a car will handle when weight distribution is actually critical, which is mainly braking and accelerating. So that out of the way, let's come to our main topic here, starting with front wheel drive. As the name suggests, the front axle is being driven by the engine here, so it's the live axle and the rear axle is the dead axle. These cars usually use a front transverse engine with a transaxle gearbox, which simply houses the gearbox and the differential in a single casing. Now, since the entire drivetrain is housed within the engine bay, from the engine all the way to the drive shaft and the front wheels, that leaves a lot of room for the engineers to engineer the cabin and the luggage space for optimum comfort. So you will find this system primarily in cars that are meant just to be a car and nothing else. They're mostly found in small hatchbacks, economy sedans, crossovers, minivans, you know the drill. Although you will find front wheel drive in quite a few exciting hot hatches, but that's basically because they are based on some economy hatchback which is front wheel drive in the first place. In terms of traction, they are the least ideal setup possible. Why? Well, remember, weight transfer. When you accelerate, you are actually taking off weight from the front wheels which are putting the power down. So, not ideal for accelerating. Also, since the front wheels are doing both acceleration and steering while the rear wheels are just hanging along for the journey, these cars heavily understeer when you accelerate out of a corner. Because there are just 2 tires, let's be honest, probably some of the thinnest available on the market, doing both the longitudinal and lateral acceleration. Now, if you somehow do manage to oversteer a front wheel drive car, which is doable if you brake hard at the entry of a corner, thus unloading the rear wheels, the correct way to straighten your car is to turn your wheel opposite to the direction the car is sliding in and hit your accelerator. Next up, rear wheel drive. Again, as the name suggests, the live axle is the rear one and the front is a dead axle. Rear wheel drive cars come in a number of engine configurations, namely front longitudinal engine, rear mid-engine, the lot. Mostly in case of front engine cars, you'll find the gearbox right behind the engine, from where the power is sent to the rear differential through a drive shaft, which diverts the power to the rear wheels. Although in some front engine sports cars like the Dodge Viper and the Lexus LFA, and in mid-engine and rear engine cars, you will find a transaxle sitting on the rear axle. Mostly it's done for weight distribution. You will find this kind of setup in sports cars, supercars, hypercars, luxury sedans, the exciting stuff, along with some heavy-duty MPVs and commercial vehicles. Why? Because they can carry heavier load than front-wheel drive counterparts. Think about it, when you're riding up an inclination, the most of the weight automatically gets transferred to the rear axles. So the driving wheels get more traction and thus pushes you up more easily. The front wheel drive cars will just spin up its wheels and go nowhere after a certain point, even if the engine has enough power to actually push the car up that inclination. Now, while turning and accelerating at the same time, rear wheel drive cars, as opposed to front wheel drive cars, tend to oversteer because first, the front wheels are doing only the steering job now, so they do a much better job. Second, the force turning the car comes from the front axle, and the force powering the car forward comes from the rear axle, which is about 2.5-3 meters apart. This creates a kind of leverage which causes the rear end of the car to step out under acceleration. How do you control oversteer in a rear wheel drive car? Well, you steer opposite to the direction the car is sliding and let the throttle go. Now, as the rear end gets back in line, this may create a pendulum effect, actually pushing the rear end to its opposite direction. So, remember to actually straighten out your steering wheel as the car itself straightens out. Finally, all-wheel drive. In all-wheel drive cars, there are no dead axle. Both the axles of the car are being powered by the engine itself. In terms of engine configuration, well, every single engine configuration available in the market has an example of an all-wheel drive model. For the front transverse engines, you have got the Golf R. For front longitudinal engines, you have got every single off-roader. You have got all the models from BMW, Mercedes, and most big trucks and SUVs. For rear engine, you have got all the Porsche 911 four-wheel drive models, so the Carrera 4S, the Turbo S, the whole bunch. In terms of mid-engine cars, you have got your Lamborghinis. Lamborghinis famously use all-wheel drive system in their supercars. So you have got the Countach, Diablo. Now, as you can imagine, all-wheel drive cars provide the ultimate traction. Why? Simple, because the entire weight of the car, no matter what the weight distribution is pushing down the driving wheels to the ground, which means all the traction that the car can possibly get, which is why you will find all-wheel drive system mostly in off-roaders and rally cars, where traction is really an issue. Also, some hot hatches which have way too much power to just put them down through the front wheels, and in some sports sedans like the Mercedes E63S and the BMW M5, the current gen, where rear wheel drive is just not enough to put all the power down securely, they use all-wheel drive for extra traction, just like the Lamborghinis and Porsches we have just discussed. Now, most of the all-wheel drive cars available in the market have a cheaper two-wheel drive model, which is either rear-wheel drive or front-wheel drive. BMW and Mercedes, for example, they use a rear-wheel drive biased all-wheel drive system, which means it sends most of the power to the rear wheels and cannot send much more than 50% of its entire power to the front wheels. Vice versa for the front wheel drive biased all-wheel drive systems. You wouldn't get these models in India because it doesn't need them, but in countries with too much rain and where the winters get too cold, economy cars are often offered with all-wheel drive system. Case in point, the Suzuki Ignis. Yes, the Maruti Suzuki Ignis, the quirky compact hatchback that you know and love in India, that same car is offered in Britain with an all-wheel drive system. Imagine that. Now, whether the all-wheel drive system is front-wheel drive biased or rear-wheel drive biased also determines if the car is going to oversteer or understeer under accelerating while turning. How to correct that? Of course, you give it an opposite lock to the direction where the car is turning, but after that, what you do with your throttle depends on whether the car is front-wheel drive biased or rear-wheel drive biased. Now, since like front-wheel drive cars, the front wheels are still doing the lateral and longitudinal acceleration at the same time, four-wheel drive cars usually are more understeery than its rear-wheel drive counterparts. So that's all for this episode of The More You Know. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment box below. Also, if you have any questions that you want to be answered in a future episode of this series, put them down in the comments and I shall try to do that. While you're down there, hit your favorite buttons, the like, share, subscribe and the bell notification icon, and I'll see you in my next video. Until then, drive hard, drive safe. Take care.